Okay.
Well, good evening to you all. It's just such a good evening to join together, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for this groundbreaking webinar this evening. It's really good to have you with us. I'd like to introduce to you Aletta Meyer. She's been the organizer of this entire webinar. Aletta, thank you for all the hard work that you've put into this. My name is Jane Butter, and I'm going to be your host for this evening. So let's just commit this evening to the Lord as we open in a word of prayer. Father, in the name of Jesus, I thank you that we can meet like this, join with each other and speak about something that we very rarely speak about. Bless us as we speak and as we listen and participate. In the name of Jesus. Amen. It's a wonderful privilege for us to host this webinar for the Hennips River Circuit of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. And just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. If you have a look at the bottom of your screen, you will see that there's a chat function. Use that if you want to speak to the panelists individually or to all the panelists or to the attendees as well. As a way, you can use that function to introduce yourself to us all, and you can say hello to the attendees and to the panelists now. There's also a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen where you can send us a question privately that you would like to have answered, time permitting. And you can choose to do that anonymously if you would like to. And so tonight we are addressing this topic that we very rarely speak about. It's something that is so relevant at the moment, and it's an absolute scourge in our country, gender-based violence, and what this is doing to all of us. Our panel this evening consists of Deacon Reverend Fozia Majwe, who is the Minister at St. John's, the Honourable Justice Mpuma Masebo, Sarika de Swart, who is a specialist social worker, and Heidi Kutsia, who is also a specialist social worker and the director of Kuluma Family Counselling. So welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd just like to give you a little bit of background about each of our panelists. Judge Mpo is a judge in the Northern Cape Division of the High Court. She's held various positions of authority in our judicial system, ranging from senior magistrate, head of the Children's Court, head of the Attridgeville Magistrates Court, providing over child justice court matters, and maintenance and domestic violence matters. Mpo, it's an absolute honor to have you with us this evening. Sarika de Swart is a specialist social worker who holds various qualifications, both locally and internationally. She has been an expert witness in court for very high-profile criminal cases and has appeared on radio and television programs. She has a particular interest in addictions and how to conquer this plague. Sarika, I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. Heidi is the director of Kuluma Family Counselling, and she hears from folk and she assists and helps people who are caught in gender-based violence. She's also a very highly qualified woman and holds degrees in the sciences, education, and social work. And Heidi, I'm honored to have you with us this evening. And Fozia, before answering the call to ministry, Fozia practiced as a property and asset manager in the secular field and holds her qualifications from UNISA. She has worked as a member of Mahube and Wesley Community Centre, where she has worked hand in hand with people who were either HIV positive and or prostitutes. She is a survivor of sexual abuse and domestic violence, and a voice for those who find themselves in these positions. And so I'm going to ask you, Fozia, to start for us and to tell us your story before we go to the other panelists. So Fozia, over to you. How did you get out of your abusive relationship?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for allowing me this space where I can just be vulnerable and open. My abuse started at a tender age of 13 when I was sexually abused and molested by my dad's brother and his son. I was born into a Muslim family, and at the age of 1, my parents got divorced because my dad then went and broke his promise to my mother that he would not take a second or a third wife. And that actually happened, and my father's family was very influential, and that is the reason why I remained behind with them. He took me from my mom, and so at the age of 13, I lived with my grandparents actually. My dad had already had his 4th wife, and that's when I was now in a position where I had to go and live with him because my grandparents were no more. His 4th wife did not want me to live with him, and I was forced to go and live with his brother and his family, which were 3 boys and 3 girls. At the age of 16, I became very rebellious because I didn't speak to anybody about this, and I ran away from home. That's when my mother was brought on board, and I came to come and live with her. And so by that time, I was I felt very unloved, rejected, and I had a lot of resentment towards my parents. And so at the tender age of 19, I got involved with my ex-husband, and by 21, we were already married. And the abuse started 6 weeks, domestic abuse, 6 weeks within having met him, when he forced himself on me for the first time. The physical abuse started in 6 months' time, and it continued for 10 years. When you're in the situation, you don't see a way out. And I felt really trapped because my family, I wasn't close to them, to be honest with you, because my mother had moved on and married, and I felt all on my own, you know. And so as a means of surviving, I became a comfort eater, and I was very depressed, and I was really very suicidal. I have a friend of over 38 years who I used to confide in, and also the house doctor that we used to use. And she referred me to somebody, and I started speaking to a counselor. This person helped me to find my self-worth and to become confident again. And that's when I started looking at ways in which to get out of this abusive marriage. I must tell you, the fact that I lost weight and started taking care of myself and wanting to get out just made him more angry than anything else. And the last beating I received was really what shocked me. If you can see my forehead, I got beaten by him with a baseball bat. My forehead tore open, my nose was broken, my ribs were broken. And he made me wait till the next morning. And as soon as somebody came to the house, I ran out of the house. And that was the last time that he actually saw me. I then went on to the police, and I was helped there to get a protection order as well as an interdict against him. And then I started the process of divorcing, which was a long and dreary one because he fought for custody of the children. I spent 10 years of my life fighting that, going to child advocates courts and up and down. And in the meantime, he had my children. The thing that helped him was that I never reported any abuse. I never spoke to people about it too. So people didn't believe that this was this man until that final beating. But then too, so people would, like family members would say, go back, go and work it out, your children and stuff like that. So the times that we lived in then was, and especially in the colored community, you were told you made your bed, go lie on it. But I want to say that, people who are not in the situation don't understand. And sometimes they make you feel that you owe this person. What helped me is getting strong, finding my strength, and getting to people that could put me onto the right places and right people. And that started the process. And today I can say I'm free. I'm happy that I left when I did, because if I didn't, I think I wouldn't have been here today. The last beating was so intense that I thought, if I don't get out of this now, I'm never going to get out of it. I'm going to get out of here in a coffin. And I want to say to women that the times then and now have changed so much. There's so many resources and avenues where you can go to and where you can find help. It's not like in the olden days. People weren't so verbal as you hear it all over, and people are against it, and people are standing up and together and for those people. You're not on your own, and it's rather better to get out than thinking that they will change, because they rarely change. It's like, I think 1 in 100 men that do change. Today, still, this ex of mine, just today, my daughter was telling me how he beat his girlfriend that lives, his living girlfriend, partner that lives with him, over the weekend because of something that she said. So I would advise women to really, if you see, don't wait for him to change, and don't think it's got anything to do with you, because it's got nothing to do with you. And don't feel guilty, and don't entertain it, because they make you feel so worthless that you don't think anything of yourself. You need to just, muster up the strength and courage and think of yourself, self-respect first, and from there onwards you'd be able to find the help. And there are people out there that are willing to help and that can help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Fozia. Thank you for just speaking to us and speaking your heart, and I really appreciate that. Heidi, you are right at the coalface. Speak to us about the advice that you would give to someone who comes to you. How would you equip them? How would you empower them?
Thank you very much, Jen, and good evening to everyone attending. I'm just so humbled to see how many participants we do have. Yeah, Kuluma Family Counselling. We work at the victim-friendly rooms at police stations in the Olivenhout-Bosch area, in Erasmia, in Vierdabrug, and at the Littleton Police Station. But before Kuluma can work out a path forward with the victim of gender-based violence, and in particular with domestic violence, we really need to understand some of the principles in abusive relationships. And during this whole process, we as a counsellor, myself as the counsellor, explores with the women who live with the abuse what the options are throughout this whole cycle and throughout this journey, walking with them, because it is a long journey. It's not something that happens overnight, because it's known that it takes for women to leave the abusive relationship up to 7 times before they actually leave. We need to learn how to break the cycle, because this cycle usually consists out of 3 phases. The first phase is really where the tension builds between the batterer and the woman. Then the next phase is an explosion or an encounter when the woman is a victim of battering and could be seriously injured. This is very often when we get to see the victims when they come to the police stations and they want to open a case, or they want to get a protection order against the abuser. And then there is the third phase where the abuser appears calm and loving, pleads for forgiveness, and promises to seek help. This is very often also where women then start feeling guilty. They think that it is their fault that this has happened, and that the abuser will change, that they can fix this relationship. And therefore then they forgive him, because also with us, as from Christianity and other religions as well, we often hear that we should forgive the perpetrator. Then we really look at, to get through that trauma, to work with that woman through that trauma, where she may believe that that she's in danger, or that she's not in danger, even when she is in danger. And this whole abuse can lead to reduced self-esteem. The victim can have signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, so that is then very often being addressed. Or even the victim can suffer long-term disability or health problems related to the physical abuse, or even to emotional abuse. And as I mentioned beforehand, we really look at working with them through the guilt and the shame. It's very, very hard for the victim to leave the relationship, because society very often normalizes unhealthy behavior, and we get so used to it. It's just another incident, or it is just normal that a woman gets hit by her husband, or the children are being hit. Then we also do empowerment with the individual person, so to actually build up the self-esteem, to look at different options, how they can handle it. We often do also role plays, and just to help the person to think what they would ask, what they would say, or what their response would be to the abuser's response. Yes, it's also, as I mentioned, it's very dangerous to leave, because very often the abuser keeps control over the victim. They would do that through their cell phone, put a tracker on the cell phone, phoning them every single minute or every 10 minutes. Where are you? What are you doing? Why haven't you come home yet? How long is it going to take you? So that all this through even the social media, finding out from friends, asking them to keep an eye on the person, makes it very, very difficult for the victim to go through this. Also, the victim there, as I mentioned, says that they might change the spouse. And also there is the social pressure to stick around with it. Because in our vows, when we marry, we often say it's for better or for worse. And people often see the perfect relationship instead of the real relationship, what is happening there. Society can't believe that a person can be so cruel that they would hit their wife or even their girlfriend in this matter. Then also, with the dangers coming even more into it, it's been proven that women are 70 times more likely to be killed once they have left or just after leaving the relationship. And then also there is, of course, the biggest concern that we very often find from the victims that we counsel is what has stopped them from doing this is the financial dependence on the abuser. Women are very often not in the position to have a home on their own name or to be working because the abuser is controlling them and not even letting them to go to work. I know of one of the victims that we counseled that her husband kept taking the car keys away from her or was taking off the connections of the batteries so she couldn't get away. She was locked into her room very often, or even withholding money from them. So there's the financial abuse in more than one way. Also with the woman thinking, what's going to happen to my children? I will not be able to look after them. I will not be able to feed them. I cannot give to them what we have at the moment. So that is very, very, very difficult. So these are things that Kuluma explores, not just through the initial trauma debriefing, but through long-term therapy with them as well. And we do this with the individual, and also we have support groups for abused women, where they can find a place, a safe place, and where they can share with each other. It's such a relief for a lot of these women to find out they are not the only one that this is happening to. And just hearing the stories from fellow abused women, from victims, and just being able to give each other advice, if I can call it that way, or to give each other support as well. Then also we help the women whilst they're still in the abusive relationship, and afterwards also to work out a safety plan, and that they know where can they go to, how to plan when they leave, that they don't have to go back to the house for clothes or whatever other means of support. We also help them to create a proper support structure around of them, because very often, because of the abuser controlling them so much, they don't have a support system anymore. So to find friends or to find family where they can go to and to be safe, that would support them and not disclose to the abuser where they are. And then also we assist with referring them to shelters, because there are shelters in South Africa and around in Gauteng for abused women. Although there are far too few for them, and it's very difficult to find place with them. They're overcrowded as well at the moment. But yes, we link them together where they then will be in a program for at least 3 months and stay safe. And throughout this whole time, and even after they have left in the relationship, Kuluma is there to support them and walk this journey with them. So that is in a nutshell what Kuluma does and how we assist the victims of abuse.
Thank you very much, Heidi. If there are any of you who would like to pose Heidi a question to Heidi, then please use the question and answer function key at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try and get to your questions at the end when we wrap up. Sarika, you are a specialist in your field. Please will you sketch for us a basic idea of an abuser, profile of an abuser, please?
Thank you, Jen, for the opportunity. I've put up my slides there so people can follow if they want to. Can you see that?
A little bit indistinct, Sarika.
Okay, I'm going to continue anyways, and we
Okay.
can send it to the participants
Okay,
later. Not a problem. Okay, so I think one of the important things is, if we listen to Fauzia's story, is that unfortunately the abuser starts fairly soon, but they don't start right away. Because if they started to be abusive right at the beginning, we probably wouldn't fall for it. We probably wouldn't stay. So there's a period of what we would call love bombing. And so that the characteristics that I'm going to give you now of the abuser would be, I would almost say, warning signs to also look out for. Now, the first thing that I would say is that there's often a love bombing phase where they would shower you with gifts and compliments, and it would almost be too good to be true. Now, the minute it feels too good to be true, you need to start asking the question, is this not maybe too good to be true? But they do that. The aim is to hook you into all the feel-good hormones. Because once you've invested time and emotion and all of that into a person, it's harder to leave, and they know that. Secondly, they would then slowly start to devalue and degrade you or break you down. And the aim here is to attach you to them by means of a trauma bond. So in a way, it is a push and pull relationship. You know, go away, come back, go away, come back. And they would intermittently be very kind to you. And this is why sometimes when we talk about the Stockholm Syndrome or a trauma bond, or we would talk about the battered wife syndrome, because people don't leave because they're always waiting for that next minute that the person is going to be nice to you again. Also, they would constantly accuse you of being unfaithful. And the aim of that is really that they want to kind of make you think you have to prove your integrity to them. So you are going to make an extra effort to devote all your time and energy to them. And this means that you are isolating yourself from other people, more than likely. And as the previous speaker, Heidi, said, this is something that they do very deliberately, because if they can isolate you from work and friends and family, you have nowhere to turn. Or that's how it feels. It feels as if you literally have nowhere to turn when you do decide to leave. Furthermore, they often use substances, and it might be because they have their own difficulties, emotional discomfort, but also sometimes because they're hoping that it would kind of filter the aggression, but it ends up making it worse. So substances would put them out into sort of rages where often this would be, you would know that it's going to be a very bad night if they start to use a substance, or they come home and they have used a substance. And they then blame you for that. So in the end, they would also tell you that it's your fault because they did have a drink and you should have left them. You shouldn't have annoyed them. So they kind of really make everything your fault. Then control. The aim is to make you obligated to them. So if they can almost possess you, so by making you financially dependent on them, and often therefore they don't want you to work, and they don't want you to have friends, and they don't even want you to do voluntary work, because they want you to buy into all the bad things they tell you about yourself. The minute you spend time with other people, you start to get other kinds of feedback about yourself. And that is going to confuse you, and it's going to make them lose their grip. So they very deliberately make sure that you are isolated. Then, of course, they will start to humiliate you in front of other people. They actually think that they have the power to make other people see you in the same way as a worthless person. But they also do this because quite often part of their personality trait is fairly antisocial and narcissistic. So there's a grandiosity about them. And so one way of making yourself feel better is by breaking other people down. Like Heidi said, they also will keep track of you. They will try and mount loads of evidence against you. You will literally have to look over your shoulder most of the time. And this is normally when you are thinking about leaving, is when you get this scared. So the three things that they do is they create a fog that is makes it so difficult for you to see clearly. And the fog is fear, obligation, and guilt. The minute you stay with somebody out of fear, obligation, or guilt, whilst they are mistreating you, you should really start to reach out, because that person has then already created circumstances where you doubt your own reality. There's something that we call gaslighting, and that is a very insidious way of manipulation and emotional abuse, whereby they make you think that you are crazy, that you are oversensitive, that if they did something, they would just deny it, or it's not that bad, or it's your fault. So in the end, it's almost difficult for the person, and I don't even want to call you a victim, I want to call you a target, because they literally target you. And I think women should step out of victim mode, realizing that they are being targeted and that there's strength on the inside. So I'm going to move to the characteristics of the women, because the interesting thing is that these things, quite often, you don't see it right in the beginning. And because they push and pull so much, you tend to wait for when they are nice again. And then there's all the financial issues as well. And normally they can be very sort of, people would like them. And so if you start saying, but they are abusive, specifically if the abuse is not physical, people might not believe you. And then that actually makes you more confused. The dilemma we have is that often the abuser is somebody with narcissistic, psychopathic, or sadistic kinds of personality traits. I'm not saying disorders necessarily, but definitely traits. That is not love, that is abuse. And what they use or weaponize against a woman is 5 things. They weaponize, and this is the characteristics of the target or the victim, the person who is being abused. What they would use against you is the fact that you are empathic, the fact that you are trying to feel and understand where they come from. They will abuse that and weaponize it against you. Empaths are wonderful, beautiful people, but that makes us a target for people who is going to make misuse of that. The second characteristic is the person who always forgives. And I know, again, this is very deeply rooted in religion, but also just in being a nice person. So if you continue to forgive, you kind of set a standard by which they feel they are allowed to treat you. And the more we forgive, when their behavior does not change, the more they feel that this is a non-verbal agreement of how they're allowed to treat you. And so if somebody changes their behavior, then I think that that is the biggest and the best apology possible. But if it's just words, then I think forgiveness is something that keeps us trapped in abusive relationships. The overly positive person who is looking for the beauty in everything and everyone. So you can see it's all beautiful people. It's all beautiful characteristics, but it is being weaponized and used against the woman. the overly positive person is the one that's going to say 90% of the time it's horrible, but that 10% makes me believe that things can be better. And unfortunately, that makes us live in a state of constant fight, flight, fear, flop, and befriending, which are all just defense mechanisms or survival mechanisms. This is not how a person can live. It's very unhealthy, and it will make you sick eventually. The fourth person is the rescuer, and I would like for the attendees or the participants to just, if you recognize yourself here, or you recognize the person that you are in a relationship with, you know, leave us a note in the chat. Do you see yourself as a rescuer, as an empath? Does that make you a target? The rescuer is that person that will do whatever they can to help and rescue and guide and save somebody else. And that almost means, when you're with an abuser, it almost means that you are setting yourself on fire to keep somebody else warm. And when I say it like that, obviously it doesn't make sense, but that is what we tend to do when we want to rescue people who does not want to change or does not have the capacity to change. And perhaps maybe just the last thing that makes us quite vulnerable to abuse is if we come from an abusive past. And the reason for that is that we tend to want to rewrite our story. So if you did not really have connection that is safe and secure with your parents or parent, or there have been abuse in the close family, then a person tries to rewrite that story. So they tend to find similar people, get involved with those kinds of people, in the hope that this time the story will end differently. And of course, the story does not end differently because you pick the same kinds of people. This is a very unconscious, pre-conscious kind of thing that we do. But once we are aware of it, we can change that. So I think what I would like to say is to please understand that if you are a target of abuse, it's not because you're worthless. It's because somebody is weaponizing your beautiful qualities against you. And there is a way to stay beautiful and soft, but to become assertive and reach out and get the help that you need. So I'm hoping that would give a little bit of an idea or a red flag system for people to look out for. Thank you, Jen.
Yo, Sarika, thank you. An enormous amount of information that you've given us in such a short while, but thank you. I really value what you've spoken to us about. There's somebody wrote on the chat, interesting language referring to a target. And so let's get back to that just now, if we can. So Mpho, you are right at the end of the line. You are the person who hears the story in court. And you're the person who has to ultimately make the decision. We know that many of our domestic violence abuse cases never reach the courts because women withdraw before it gets there. So I'm just very interested to know your feelings around this and what we can do as women. You want to unmute yourself, Mpho?
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, good evening, everyone. Our conversation tonight is on gender-based violence, and it is violence directed against a person or a group of persons because of their gender. It is a human right violation, deeply rooted in gender inequality. Although this phenomenon affects both men and women, it's important for me to emphasize because men can also be victims, or men can also be targeted. It is more prevalent in respect of women and girl children. Any form of violence, including threats of violence, is prohibited by law. I preside in the High Court and hear mainly rape and murder cases. Other offenses like assault, malicious damage to property would be ancillary to the aforementioned. It will be appropriate, though, considering the subject of gender-based violence, to include issues of abuse which come before the magistrate presiding in the domestic violence court. You may be experiencing any type of the following abuses: physical, sexual, emotional, verbal, psychological, and economic abuse, intimidation, harassment, stalking, damage to property, entry to your property without your consent, and it includes any form of controlling or abusive behavior towards you. We've heard Heidi and Sorika touching on the controlling behavior. And I just want to emphasize that they use their cell phones or their laptops, that's cyber or electronic control, which you must also look out for. This is what you can do when you are abused. During office hours, between 8 and 4:15, you may go to the magistrate's court nearest to you. Establish first where the domestic violence court is, because in courts like Pretoria and Johannesburg, the domestic violence court or the family courts in general are not in the main building. Should you need assistance after hours, go to your nearest police station or call the police to come to where you are if possible. Notify them that you need to report domestic violence. Once the South African police members have attended the scene, they or he or she, depending on how many have responded, must hand to you a notice that explains the details regarding domestic violence. If circumstances permit, they must also explain content. I'm emphasizing if circumstances permit because sometimes you are so injured that priority must be given to rushing you to hospital or removing you from your home to a shelter instead of explaining to you. You won't hear if you are in that state. What gets presented before the magistrate sitting in the domestic violence court is an application amplified with a supporting affidavit or affidavits for consideration. If the magistrate is satisfied that there is a prima facie evidence that the respondent has committed the act of domestic violence and that the complainant may suffer undue hardship if the protection order is not issued immediately, the court, being well aware that the respondent has not received any notice yet, issues an interim protection order, which must be served on the respondent in the prescribed manner. Such interim protection order will include a copy of the application. The interim protection order must call upon the respondent to show cause on the return date while the final order cannot be confirmed. The respondent may anticipate the return date. By this I mean he can apply for the case to be heard earlier, but this must be done upon notice to the complainant and serve that on the court and the complainant. The purpose of the interim order is to provide immediate protection to the complainant. Upon service of the application and the interim protection order to the respondent, the sheriff must bring the return of service to court because that serves as proof that the respondent has been served. The clerk of court will then immediately cause a certified copy of the interim order and the original warrant of arrest to be served on the complainant. If the respondent does not appear in court on the return date, and the court is satisfied that proper notice was given to him, and the sufficient evidence to show that he has committed or is committing an act of domestic violence or sexual harassment, the court may confirm the order. If, however, the respondent appears on the return date and opposes confirmation of the interim protection order, then the court must hear the matter and determine the outcome based on the evidence. The protection order will specify more accurately what the respondent is prohibited to do. A breach of the protection order requires the respondent to be arrested immediately and tried in a court of law. This means that if you as the complainant are aware that he has breached or contravened the protection order, you must report it immediately to the police so that they can action it. Some complainants don't report the breach, or during the period after reporting and the protection order or interim protection order has been issued, there's some form of relationship that interferes with implementation of the protection order. Only the magistrate who has authorized the warrant of arrest can cancel it, no one else. I now come to talk about cases of rape and murder, because they are the most prevalent and the most heinous offenses committed against women and girl children. They are heard in the regional courts and the high courts. I said we live in a constitutional dispensation. By this, I mean the Constitution is the supreme law of our country. And all of us as judicial officers are expected or required by law to conduct fair trials. Section 165, subsection 2 of the Constitution stipulates that the courts are independent and subject only to the Constitution and the law, which they must apply impartially and without fear, favor, or prejudice. This means that even when I hear a case involving abuse, as an individual judicial officer, I still have to be impartial and hear all the evidence. I still have to consider relevant evidence to determine whether or not a case has been made out against the accused. If a case has not been made out, I have to acquit the accused. If a case has been made out, I convict. After conviction, I afford both parties opportunity to address the court on sentence. Here, I consider personal circumstances of the accused, the seriousness of the offense, and the interests of the community. Our courts follow what is called the precedent system. By this, I mean the lower courts are bound by decisions and guidance of the higher courts. The Supreme Court of Appeal said the following in State versus Machichi, that our sentencing must also be victim-orientated. It is for this reason that we normally ask for victim impact reports so that we can determine, for example, in a murder case, how the loss of the deceased has impacted on the family. Of importance is the Criminal Law Amendment Act, which some know simply as the Minimum Sentencing Act. It prescribes minimum sentences that we must impose. We can only deviate from imposing these sentences if there are substantial and compelling circumstances. And our failure to impose these prescribed minimum sentences for no reasons, SCA says, is for flimsy reasons. We must. For example, in a murder case, if the type of murder that the accused has committed requires me to impose imprisonment of life, and I impose anything less than life imprisonment for no apparent reasons, If there are no substantial and compelling circumstances that allow me to deviate, then I would have deviated for flimsy reasons. And this is what the Supreme Court of Appeal is discouraging courts to do. When judicial officers consider cases before them, they maintain their independence and their impartiality and remain within the law and the facts of a particular case. They, however, draw guidance from tried principles used in the higher courts. The rape case in point that I wish to share with you, because gender-based violence in the courts, in the higher courts, we normally experience it in the murder cases and the rape cases. I just want to share with you what the former Chief Justice Mohammed said in one of the cases, the Chapman case. He said the following, and I quote him: "Rape is a very serious offense, constituting as it does a humiliating, degrading, and brutal invasion of the privacy, the dignity, and the person of the victim. The rights to dignity, to privacy, and the integrity of every person are basic to the ethos of the Constitution and to any defensible civilization. Women in this country are entitled to the protection of these rights. They have a legitimate claim to walk peacefully on the streets, to enjoy their shopping and their entertainment, to go and come from work, and to enjoy the peace and tranquility of their homes without the fear, the apprehension, and the insecurity which constantly diminishes the quality and enjoyment of their lives." Close quote. So tonight, I just want to say to the women who have experienced abuse and their families presently experiencing this scourge of gender-based violence. This is what Chief Justice Mohammed said in Chapman, and I want to share it with you because we are bound by it. The courts are under a duty to send a clear message to the accused, to other potential rapists, and to the community. We are determined to protect the equality, dignity, and freedom of all women, and we shall show no mercy to those who seek to invade those rights. Close quote. I just want, in conclusion, to share the other tried principle that we take into consideration for purposes of sentencing, and this was said in the case of Rabi. Punishment should fit the criminal as well as the crime, be fair to society, and be blended with a measure of mercy according to the circumstances. Thank you very much, Jen.
Yo, Mpho, I've got a question for you that comes from one of our attendees. It says, must an interim order be issued when an applicant applies for protection where there is physical evidence of abuse? Our experience at the Pretoria Domestic Violence Court, having sat there for one full day with the victim, is that no interim orders were issued. People were clearly told that the court does not issue an interim order, just come back on the date shown for the court order.
Oh yes, remember interim protection order, it serves as interim relief, immediate relief until the return date. So interim protection orders are issued. But before the interim protection order is issued, the magistrate must be satisfied that the offense has been committed and there's prima facie evidence that if it is not issued, the complainant will suffer hardship. But it all depends on the form has information on the application, plus the affidavit, the accompanying affidavit will also elaborate more on what the issues are. I don't understand when interim protection orders are not issued. I'll give you the number of the Pretoria head of the section so that this matter is followed up with her. Let me give the number: 012 319 4004.
Thank you. I hope the person who posed that question managed to get that number down. If you haven't, I've got it and I'll get it for you. There's another question, Heidi, and I think it comes your way. It says, why should the victim be the one removed from the couple's property and taken to a shelter and not the perpetrator locked in a controlled environment instead?
Honestly, Jen, and sorry, yes, and Paul, do you want to answer that?
No, you may answer, Heidi.
Well, I think I will give my part or my 2 cents to that, and then you can elaborate more on it because you have much more a law background than what I have. For me, that is actually amazing that that always happens like that. It doesn't have to be that way. The perpetrator can also be removed from the property and locked so that the controlled environment can be held. But I think it's just much, much more difficult to really to get to that because we are so used to that always the victim is being removed. And Paul, please elaborate.
Look, you're right. There's no case where they say, or there's no authority which says it is the victim that must be removed. Sometimes you find that the victim has children, young children, and they have to endure the hardship, whereas it's easier to remove the man. In most instances, it's even more convenient to remove the man. And I will add, just because he has been removed does not mean that he should stop paying for the rent if they're living in a rented house or if they're living in a bonded house. He doesn't stop. His obligations continue. In fact, part of the explanation that the clerk or the police give to the victims is the relief, the nature of the relief that they are entitled to. And that must be given to them. That's why I said earlier when I spoke, it depends on the state in which the victim is, because sometimes when they are badly injured or when they are severely traumatized, sometimes they can't hear or follow what is being explained to them.
Thank you, Paul. Sarika, I've got something that I'd like you to perhaps just try and answer for us. The question comes, my experience of trying to assist victims of domestic violence in getting a protection order is that the domestic violence court does not seem to fully understand the seriousness of the immediate threat. And they're often told to come back weeks later.
Sure.
That's very true.
How can we create... Go for it.
No, I think that is very true. That is the experience of most women, I would say. I think it kind of links a little bit with the previous answer and previous question, whereby we have to understand that the perpetrator does not want to leave. So it takes quite a bit of an effort to get that person to leave if he's not yet been found guilty. That's the one thing. The second thing is that, as Heidi said, the danger in which a person is once you have left or you've gone and got a protection order, you are actually still in danger. You can phone the police, you can say you have a protection order, but you are still in danger. And for that reason, it is sometimes the only way. And it is true. That is why I'm saying that, yes, we are victims when this happens to us, but we are targets. And I want women to move from the point of victimhood to saying, I'm a target of a crime, so that we can call it what it is. That's the first thing. And the second thing is so that we can then move from being a victim to a survivor. But for that, we need the system. So unfortunately, the system needs a lot of education. And I think, Jen, that this is part of what we can start doing tonight is to start the conversation and to not stop the conversation.
But there's another comment that comes, maybe education needs to be done on these options and needs to be made available. And I just want to say to the person who's posed that comment, this is exactly why we're doing this tonight. We actually want to tell you that your freedom is one conversation away. One conversation. And that we're all here and we're all willing to actually get involved and to help you. That what happened to Fozia and a baseball bat to your face will not happen to women, to other women, that we're going to stand up to the scourge. I wonder if I can ask each of you, just as we start wrapping up this evening, if I could ask you each for just a morsel of advice to women who are out there and who are struggling to cope. Heidi, can I kick with you? What would you say to women out there who are stuck in these situations?
I really want to say to them, Jen, and to everyone, you are not alone. We are here. There are many people there that will help you and support you, but you are not alone.
Oh, thank you, Heidi. Thank you. Sarika.
Yes, I want to say the utmost respect to women when they do break the silence. I want to tell you that when you tell us your story, for us it is as if we are standing on holy ground. The minute you break the silence is the minute we can start to help you. And don't ever listen to someone that said, why did you not leave earlier? Celebrate the fact that you are leaving now. And we are here.
Wow, thank you. Ja, ek is skoon hoendervleis at the moment. Fozia, give us one morsel of advice to women out there who go through what you went through.
I would like to say that you don't have to be ashamed or embarrassed because you are being abused, and you are not responsible for other people's actions, only for your own. Get out if you can, while you still can, because not everybody is fortunate enough to come out and alive, or even to live and tell their story.
Thank you. Thank you. Aletta, a grain of advice from you.
I think all I would like to say is you are worth so much more. God, that's not the life that God wanted for you.
Thank you. Mpho, I'm going to ask you to wrap up for us.
Okay, no doubt the session this evening was insightful. We would like to leave you with the following. Everyone has the right to equal enjoyment and protection of the law. The legislative framework is adequate, in my view. What may be lacking is implementation and a paradigm shift of mindsets. Women and children in particular are the vulnerable members of our society and deserve protection by the law. We encourage women to speak out and to break the silence of abuse. Approach the courts. Where minor children are involved, involve the Office of the Family Advocate. Where litigation becomes necessary, particularly in the case of unemployed women with a need for legal advice, they can approach Legal Aid South Africa. There are other institutions like university law clinics, Lawyers for Human Rights, and non-governmental organizations always willing and ready to assist. To Fozia and the other women and men who have suffered the abuse, we say Ngai, which means we are sorry. Reverend Jen Bota, Reverend Aletta Meyer, and this team care. Break the silence and obtain help. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mpho. Thank you. I've left a very difficult question for last. which reads as follows, a comment coming from what Fawzia mentioned as the role of the faith community in preventing people from leaving. How can we as the church, in inverted commas, change the narrative around marriage, divorce, relationships, patriarchy, and domestic violence? Most of the people that I've dealt with that remain in abusive relationships do so because of the notion that the church would condemn divorce, them leaving, etc. It's a deeply theological question.
Yes.
But I want to say to every woman out there, go and speak to the leader of your faith community. I think that on a one-on-one conversation, it's not the same. It's just a generalization, and we will help you. Statistics have shown us that there's an increase in reported cases around this problem, but equally, there's an increase in the number of cases being withdrawn and that never come to a place where we find closure and healing. And sometimes the abused person dies and never finds justice. Please will you remember that your freedom is just one conversation away. We have a lot of contact numbers of Tutela and Kuluma. We've been given the domestic violence court number, and we will make that available to you. You can contact any one of the 6 of us here present this evening, and we will start that conversation with you and encourage you to find help. Please don't keep quiet. Time has come for us to speak out, and I can promise you that the 6 of us will listen, and that we will help you. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. God bless you, and God hold you in the palm of his hand. Heidi, thank you. Paul, thank you. Aletta, thank you for arranging this and for organizing everything. Sarika, I really appreciate your depth of knowledge, and thank you. And Fawzia, thank you for telling your story. I can't thank you enough for that. Thank you for being brave enough to tell us all. If you have a look at the chat function on the side, if you click on the chat button at the bottom, Sarika has put up her number. Heidi has put up her number. Take them down. Don't leave here tonight without taking down those numbers, that if you need help, that you can actually get it. God bless and keep you all. Good night, panel. Please unmute yourselves so that we can all say good night. Folk who have attended with us
Yes.
this evening.
All
Really
women
appreciate it.
out there.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you and good night.
Good night.
Good night.
So much.
Thanks,
Good
Jen.
night.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.